我在那边搞的，因为他如果是用的话，挺大的。你不能会给我好多东西，好多东西，这个怎么好多这种的，那我们的文化这个里面，然后但是这个现在价格就是所以他俩他不管，上面不管你不能用吗？我说的哪里用？我是往回的这个。对的，这个家。然后。用了没关系，这次你大家都已经用了，没办法。
You're my shelter from trouble. You're my anchor in life's ocean. But most of all, you're my best friend.
这是80年代disco舞厅。
盘点12首经典电影主题曲，每一首
现在喜。
You're my friend. You're my shelter from trouble. You're my anchor in life's ocean. You're my best friend. You're always when I'm in trouble.
Slow it out. And it's the worst thing you've ever had in your life. Remember the word forever. When you have already forgotten the period of September. Why? Memories are fascinating. They're not stored in any particular location in your brain. They're actually stored in the connections between the regions of your brain. When you saw that glass, you saw the bottle and it said bar, and the barkeep said, well, that sound, that spelling, they interconnect memories. Those connections connect to other sounds, the sound of Multicore getting poured into the shot glasses, the sound of everyone chanting in the room, Multicore, Multicore. All of those sounds and that spelling, they interconnected, and they also connect to images. They connected to images of the green bottle, they connected to the shot glasses, they connected to the decaying fish. They connected to the face of that garden, that Viking face, that's a part of that word. And those in turn connect to sensory experiences, like that awful taste in your mouth, the smell of burning, decaying fish, the heat, the fire. Those connect to emotional content, to disgust, to anger at your friend, to excitement. They connect to your journey. They connect to what is alcohol, what is Scandinavia, what is friendship, what is adventure. All of these things are now a part of this word, and they make it true. Where the Hungarian word you don't even remember what it sounds like. This memory isn't associated with iPhone cameras and SLR cameras and the sound of a shutter and the feelings you get when you look at photos. Those associations exist. They're connected to another word. Let's return to where I was. My situation was as follows. I was thankfully there was no during that time, I one thing, I built and reviewed flashcards on these computerized face recognition systems. But instead of using translations on those flashcards, I began with pictures. If I wanted to learn the French word for dog, chien, then I would search on Google Images for chien, and I would find that French bloggers didn't choose the dogs I would expect. Their dogs were smaller and cuter somehow. And so I used these dogs and built a vocabulary pictures of French bloggers. And as I built that vocabulary, I graduated over studies. And I started learning abstract words and grammar that way, using fill in a blank sentence. If I wanted to learn a word like went, that's then put to go. Story. Yesterday I played school. Picture. So I learned my abstract grammar in that way. And 3 months later I had that. And I found myself in this room with this French person. We began the conversation. Bonjour. It wasn't fluent, it was a bit stunted, but this was the first French in my life, and I was speaking in French, and I was thinking in French, and we should finish the conversation at the end of this conversation. The teacher should be, there's something wrong with your test. It says you should be the intermediate level. The advanced level. So in the next 7 weeks, I read 10 books, I wrote 70 pages. By the end of that summer, I was completely. I realized that I had found something important. So I started writing and creating computerized tools around it. And in 2012, I learned Russian. My revenge on that language. In 2013 through 15, I learned Hungarian. In 2015, I started Japanese and stopped learning Spanish, came back and started Japanese again. In each of these experiences, I learned a lot. Different ways of tweaking, find efficiencies here and there. If you want to learn a language, in that life, learn needs to connect images and sense and taste and grammar. It can't be some kind of abstract grammatical. Words in your mind. Grammar. You start to realize that you don't need language genes, some gift from God to accomplish it. This is something that everyone has both the time and
I was riding on the back of just cruising along with my favorite birds. It was a pretty fresh day, so we were all rugged up in our At a set of red lights, my husband lifted his visor and he said to me, "Hey, come feel my handles." So naturally, I reached for his hips and gave him a playful squeeze and said, "Oh." What he, of course, meant was his heated motorcycle handles, not his love handles. Yeah. A classic and genuine misunderstanding, and luckily good humor. Otherwise, this could have ended in an argument. But interactions like these happen every day in intercultural relationships. This is not usual. In fact, 1/3 of Australian marriages are intercultural these days, according to the EBS, which means we've never been more interconnected across the globe than we are right now. What I didn't tell you so far is that I'm from Austria, so my first language is Austrian German. Australia. So these kinds of conversations, misunderstandings, long explanations of jokes and words shape our relationship. By a show of hands, who in here knows at least one intercultural couple? Maybe it's even you. Exactly. Now, in my research with intercultural couples, I found many beautiful aspects of having two different languages in its partners, but also quite a few challenges that monolingual couples don't necessarily face. Let me ask you this. If you cannot flawlessly communicate with the person you want to be closest to in this world, how does that affect your relationship? This is what I'm going to answer for you today. I speak 6 languages and I focus my studies in linguistics and I work with intercultural couples to uncover behavior and their dynamic. So let me take you on a journey today through the science behind all of these lovely little stories.
外贸已经分成了2个世界，有人还在各地开展会发信，一天忙到晚，利润却越来越薄；有人已经实现了坐在办公室里发 Facebook， 一年做了1000多万美刀，这不是夸张。加起来8个人的小团队，没有1个人去过展会，没有1个业务员出过国，去年干了1000多万。而那些还在用传统方法的团队，可能几百号人营收和人家差不太多。你说差距到底在哪？接下来我就来拆解这个案例。很多人做 Facebook 上来就发产品，发报价，结果发了半年，相反，家人每个人每天加20到30个基本好友，目标国家的行业相关。采购经销商终端用户加完不是放着，而是去刷他们的帖子，有真实的评论，比如你们修车时最常用哪种工具，现在耗损率怎么样？第二步，讲5个月后再开始发内容，这时候账号已经有几百上千个精准好友，发出去的帖子有人点赞，有人评论，有人转发，平台算法一看，这账号是活的，有人在互动，自然就会给你推流的。 发什么，不是产发设备跑起来的视频，发客户痛点解读，发行业趋势分析。第3步转化交给专人负责。评论区里那些问 how much 的私信里来询价，有人专门对接各个疗程订单，就这样8个人管着几10个国家客户。看到这里，你可能会想，Facebook 在用啊，为什么我没效果？原因有2个。第一个原因，你可能根本不知道 Facebook 能做外贸，或者不相信。你可能会想，新人玩的东西，老外采购都是老头，谁刷那？我发过几条，没人看没用。我们这行业太传统，不适合。其实你目标市场的采购商、经销商、终端用户全在里面刷着玩，不是他们不在，是你不在。第2个原因，你可能知道要运营社媒，但还在用传统思维，把 B2B 平台那一套搬过来用，但老外看了只想划走。那些做得好的根本不发产品。如果你现在还在靠好展会上门膜拜做外贸，你的竞争力正在快速下降，不是你不够努力，是你的方法已经落后了。当别人坐在家里，一条帖子引来几10个新的需求的时候，你的业务员还在各。当别人的内容在半夜触达地球另一端的采购商的时候，你还在纠结下个月的展会要不要参加。这不是危言耸听，是正在发生的事实。最简单的办法就是赶紧去了解社媒的运营逻辑。
I'm going to let you in on 3 specific challenges that intercultural partners face, but some parts don't even know about this. Some things are very difficult. Romantic relationships, but you can apply this fully to friends or even representatives. Only these domains sometimes. That's a declaration of love, which usually Now I directly the rest
可以干货和销货的一些资料，来把它放到这个闸里面。
So what does that mean for
啊，
Japanese,
这
French,
个西商的这个资料，
are they unable to include
这张这么小，打印出来。
Now my husband and I,
不是我还跟你说的那个，我看你贴了一个还比划了比划。
I love to
太小了。行吧，这么着吧，我也。
We can observe this also with other individuals. For example, some couples have been relationships. Now, with anger, it's very often totally different experiences. It's the classic. Familiar? Let me give you an example. Early on in my relationship, during an argument, I wrote her Now, at that time in my relationship, I had no grasp how offensive they were to me. To me, it
通常的那个公司这样可能是用手机。
I had no emotional
对，我跟
connection
他
to
要一
it.
下他们的操作。
But my husband, he was shocked and rightly so. I used it since in any context. But that's the thing, when intercultural partners
上网站上肯定不能。
use the word
那
choice,
咱自己决定。
word language,
哎，那个上面需要什么呀？需要那个明细账的那个。
and miscommunication. And there's what's the interpretation? And that's where intercultural partners bring their language background to the table and have to
这个也不一定非得现在。
at the same time. They're fighting. Now, fighting is already difficult with monolingual partners. Adding all of these elements that requires a lot of communication. But let's be honest, who actually sits down to determine the terms of a fight before a fight, right? Doesn't happen. The second challenge I'd like to share with you today is making each other laugh is a big part of relationships, but humor often doesn't translate. Sometimes it can be funny in one language, but it falls flat in another, or
那就有点吓人了，天不能，肯定不能这样说啊。就遇到过一次，但是肯定不
on the
能。
receiving side, a partner might feel unsure if they grasp the true meaning of the joke or just a superficial facet. That could be a purely linguistic issue, like not picking up on sarcasm or not recognizing a pun because the language systems aren't there. There's also the cultural aspect. Partners with different language backgrounds in groups of joke. So the people that understand the joke and the people that don't. I never understood why the Aussie phrase "shrimp on a Barbie" isn't actually funny, since it actually quite annoys them. My husband doesn't understand why the spongy, nostalgic 90s TV show Liebesgeschichten und Heiratssachen is so hilarious. Different in groups. That means that intercultural partners have limited common ground to work with. And if one partner doesn't understand the joke, the other is stuck trying to explain it to them, and that conversation is never finished. From the producing side, we all know that producing humor in a second language is an incredibly difficult skill to master. There's so many elements to get right. The subtext of it, the punchline, the context, the delivery, all while making sure that it's appropriate and well funny, right? Now, in my research with intercultural couples, they all confirmed that they feel less funny when joking in a second language with their partners. Can you imagine what that does to your self-esteem and to your couple dynamic? In one particular interview, one of the male participants said about his wife, "I don't think she's ever made me laugh. She's a German speaker." Now these sentiments are even I can attest to that. I always felt that I was effortlessly hilarious in Austrian German, but I couldn't bring that same energy to English. And I was so disheartened that my husband would never know the true comedic genius his wife actually is. Such a tragedy. But that's the problem here. Humor, or the lack thereof, can create distance between partners. It can stop us from really knowing each other. I've left the last challenge, which I find the most interesting one, and it is also the most fun. It is something couples deal with, and it is so subtle, and it is the hidden power dynamics between internet partners. From a pure language perspective, when we're only talking language here, there is always a partner who is linguistically superior and someone who is. You might think, well, it's the one who speaks the language better, right? That can be one aspect, but it's not quite that simple. There's many more layers. You are correct, though. One aspect is language proficiency. Now, even though my English skills are really good and high, my husband is amazing. He will always be more proficient.
是啊，我们现在要进的话，你要用找他让他验证。我要说这个。
He's the one who explains vocabulary to me during movies. All of this is but in some ways,
是不是没有人啊？
this relationship is linguistically dependent. And that is something we it's extremely apparent though when we have an argument, having all these heated discussions in English.
他们颜色不同是我严重，
His person
就是现在开通的，哎，
during the day versus like the conversation in English. It takes his responsibility, but I very know if it's just like say.
在我这儿发给你。
Tendencies to partner with
现在最多的那个
like I said, your other
上
status of language and usage.
他要资料那个
Global player languages English, Spanish. Their view in comparison to lesser spoken languages.
你现在那个你也知道在是明天家了，
The
你也知道我的，
status of English
怎么可能在一样？
listen to But one factor we cannot forget is linguistic Now in Australia, a native speaker like myself isn't linguistic. But if you remove that safety it's very much as soon as we try to suddenly I'm the one translating it. I presented you with a range of pretty apparent. Dealing with two different languages here is you might be asking what's the solution? The bad news is that never really, no matter my husband and I would spend time and we
有，这是都人。
very similar. The first
你看韩密码上面有，就是那个花三，
where they do
哦，拿到了。
你像韩密，
beware of the humor is rooted in the cultural background. And it's and conscious that these things are happening for you
哦，这个公司这个公司是一直同事吗？
and only then will you work with culture is a perfect blend of both your cultures, habits, and traditions. Build your language, invent new words that switch up your languages to find your own, get your own insights, to find your own comedic language. That's
那个职业那个新账号，
and work towards
挂到我们上网上。
他会哎，你看这个吧，
what I want you to
没有
do
一间卡，他给我挂上了，
是吧？
also
有吗？
or in a love is hard in a second language, but it's definitely worth it. I'm sure you'll. Thank you.
有吗？上卡没有给上我一看看。
要不你去买个账号，20。 真的，后来完了吗？
Frankie preschool, my husband should be behind me.
And I forgot the date. We lived in this house.
你别反正，你别反正，
Put the
反正两
car
边行不行
on
啊？你不能这样子讲哦。
Our brains have the capacity to store memories, and all of that information is accessible.
他说你视频了，我好好的。
An article in Scientific American estimates the human brain can store 2.5 million gigabytes of data.
没，人一开始
But if you've ever
但是因为不小心讲嘛，对吧？
you know, brain is not always easy to access. Because memory is not just one system.
这个是用那个
And a number of factors in our daily
这
lives
个认证的。
became like a real-life 10-second song after brain surgery to the series. Surgery was clear, less frequent.
5年前他要信息的年报，年报上了那年报的密码没有没有，我这目前就有个营业，今天要啊，因为到时候放年报还得。啊，还要啥还要啥？你要啥？我就是问一下国家企业金融信息，公共信息，像其他的社保不因为我弄的点。电子服务给我中间，电子服务只是保定的，他自己的账号，他让他直接上可能不了。
Some memories come to mind almost automatically. Like if you're walking through a garden and you smell the kitchen table, and all of a sudden you're thinking of your favorite beverage for tea. Other memories take more brain power and effort to recall, like trying to remember my new computer password. Because some memories take more brain power and effort to recall,
那这没有账号啊？ 没有全部的账号。
you're trying to remember
你这资料里边没有。
but you run into your neighbor and
没有25号万一我的资料。
you're about their new car, you can only remember 2 of them.
给。
You know our memory storage is pretty impressive.
3到了。
5,000 iPhones big. The short-term memory that you're using to keep track of your grocery list is more like 7 plus or minus 2 information. And it's really easy to get active short-term memory. Problem? We live in a very distracted world. You're trying to remember all the details of a project that you're working on. So that you can share it with the team. At the same time, your brain is paying attention to what your colleagues are saying, trying to throw email alerts pop up on your computer, distracted by text messages from your family asking what's for dinner, and wondering, can it take a break soon? Ignoring all those distractions and competing priorities takes up a lot of energy. When our brains are doing 400 things, we're more like errors, like forgetting things about a meeting, or missing a key part of your presentation, and then beating yourself up for information. Which brings us to another brain-draining habit that can mess with your brain and make it hard to remember where you left your stress. Doesn't have to be huge or major stressors either. All those day-to-day stresses, pressures, and deadlines, they have brain space too. And apparently, door locks are my thing. An article from Queen's University estimates we have 6,200 thoughts each day. That's a lot of potential for distractions. There was a study at the University of California that found when we're interrupted,
like with distractions or multitasking, we try to compensate for them. This makes us feel more stressed. As you can imagine, it's not very efficient. We've all been in situations where we feel a bit stressed out and overwhelmed by our never-ending to-do list. Between emails and phone calls, and Zoom meetings and project deadlines, we're coming home from work feeling tired and our brains are burnt out. There was an article published in the journal Science of Learning that showed stress not only impacts our memory retrieval, so it's hard to remember that door code. Stress also makes it hard for our brains to problem solve and think of creative solutions. I'm going to get into my house and I can't remember my door code. We know all those day-to-day stresses, pressures, and deadlines mess up our memory. What about bigger stresses? Like the uncertainty and change of living through a multi-year pandemic, financial pressure, family stress. These stresses drain brain resources too, making us more likely to make mistakes and making it harder to remember. So, memory errors are common, especially when you're tired, overworked, or stressed. It's great to know I still need to get into my medication. How do we boost memory in these situations and recharge those brain cells? It's tempting to try and just think harder. That doesn't always work. Have you ever been trying to think of the name of a movie or an actor, and it's right on the tip of your tongue, but you can't quite remember it, and then 4 hours later you're driving back to work and that name comes to you out of the blue? Yeah, me too. Totally normal. When it comes to our memory, thinking harder doesn't always work because of a process of competitive inhibition of the neurons in your brain. Basically, when you try to think too hard about one super specific piece of memory, the brain cells in that part of your brain get overloaded and blocked. They need time to recharge. Still there, still in the brain. The access remember how stress makes your brain more likely to make more mistakes. Do this instead. If you're than usual, your brain feels stuck, you can't seem to find the memory you need, it might be a sign that your brain needs a reset. Can't remember a code or a password, standing at your door like me and you have every 4-digit code you know except the one you need. Think about something else for a minute. Anything else. Chat with the store clerk at the grocery store about the weather instead of staring at the debit machine trying to remember your bank code. Or social media for because instead of giving those memory centers a chance to recharge and reset. Making more mistakes than normal at work, you can't seem to spend anything or you're stumbling over your words in the meeting. Get up and take a real break. Go for a walk around your office, do something fun for a few minutes. Breaks, refresh your mental resources, and give your brain back the energy and focus it needs to find that information. Memory errors aren't just in your mind. They might be a sign your brain needs a break.
Growing up, I was an avid athlete. My main sport was soccer, and I was a goalkeeper, which is both the best and the worst. When you're a goalie, especially in uniform, you get all the glory for a great shot, but you also get the grief to land a shot in the goal. When you're a goalie, all eyes are on you, and with that comes the pressure. I distinctly remember one game in high school. I was playing for the California State team, which is part of the Olympic development. I was having until I realized that the national coach was standing right behind me. that's when everything changed. In a matter of seconds, I went from playing at the top to the bottom of my ability. Just knowing that I was being evaluated changed my performance and forever how I thought about the mental aspects. The ball being thrown in slow motion. But after that, I wasn't so lucky. I tipped it right into the net. My team lost. The national coach walked away. I choked under the pressure of those evaluative eyes. Just about everyone does it from time to time. There's so many opportunities, whether it's taking a test, giving a talk to a client, form of torture. I like to call it the job interview. But the question is why? Why do we sometimes fail to perform up to our potential under pressure? It's especially bewildering in the case of athletes who spend so much time physically honing their craft. Not as off the playing field as well. Whether we're taking a test or giving a talk, it's easy to feel like we're ready at the top of our and then perform at our worst. It turns out that we practice under the types of conditions we're actually going to perform under. And as a result, when all eyes are on us, in my experience on the playing field and in other important facets really pushed me into the field of cognitive science. I wanted to understand how we could use our knowledge, the mind and the brain, to come up with psychological tools that would help us perform at our best. So why does it happen? Why do we sometimes fail to perform up to what we're capable of? It may not be so surprising to hear that it's just a situation we worry about. Consequences, what others will think of us. What is surprising is that we often get in our own way, precisely because our minds accomplish too much. That's right, we pay too much attention to what we're doing. When we're concerned about performing our best, we often try and control aspects of what we're doing that are best left on autopilot, conscious awareness. As a result, you mess up. Think about a situation where you're shuffling, and what would happen if I asked you to think about what you're doing with your knee while you're doing this? There's a good chance you'd fall on your face. We as humans only have the ability to pay attention to so much at once, which is why, by the way, it's not a good idea to drive and talk on the cell phone. And under pressure, when we're concerned about performing at our best, we can try and control aspects of what we're doing that should be left outside conscious control. The end result is that we mess up. The research team over attention, and we call it paralysis by analysis. In one study, we asked players to dribble a soccer ball and to pay attention to an aspect of their performance that they would not otherwise attend to. We asked them to pay attention to what side of the foot was contacting the ball. We showed that performance was slower and more error drew their attention to the step-by-step details of what they're doing. When the pressure is on, we're often concerned with performing at our best, and as a result, we try and control what we're doing to get the best performance. The end result is that we actually screw up. In basketball, the term unconscious is used to describe a shooter who can't miss. And San Antonio Spurs star Tim Duncan has said, when you have to stop and think, in dance, choreographer George Sheen used to urge his dancers, don't think, just do. When the pressure's on, when we want to put our best foot forward, ironically, we often try and control what we're doing in a way that. So what do? Knowing that we have attention, a lot of it comes down to the tough part of our brain that sits over our eyes and usually helps us focus in positive ways. It often gets hooked on the wrong things. So how do we unhook it? Something as simple as singing a song or paying attention to one's toes, pro golfer Jack Nicklaus is rumored to can help us take our mind off of those pesky details. It's also true that practicing under conditions that we're going to perform under, closing the gap between training and competition, can help us get used to that feeling of all eyes on us. True off the playing field as well. Whether it's getting ready for an exam or preparing for a big talk, one that might have a little pressure associated with it, getting used to the types of situations you're going to perform under really matters. When you're taking a test, close the book. Practice retrieve memory under time situations. And when you're giving a talk, practice in front of others. And if you can't find anyone who will listen, practice in front of a video camera or even a mirror. The ability to get used to what it will feel like can make a difference in whether we choke or thrive. We've also figured out some ways to get rid of those pesky worries and self-doubts that tend to creep up in stressful situations. Researchers have shown that simply jotting down your thoughts and worries before a stressful event can help to download them from mind, make them less likely to pop up in the moment. It's kind of like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're really worried about what you have to do the next day. You're trying to think about everything you have to accomplish and you write it down and then you can go back to sleep. Journaling or getting those thoughts down on paper makes it less likely that they'll pop up and distract you in the moment. The end result is that you can perform your best when it matters most. So up until now, I've talked about what happens when we put limits and some tips we can use to perform up to potential. But it's important to remember that it's not just our own individual being that can put limits and that can perform poorly. Our environment, whether we choke or thrive, our parents, our teachers, our coaches, our bosses, all influence whether or not we can put our best foot forward when it matters most. Take math as an example. That's right, I said it, math. Lots of people profess to choke or are anxious about doing math, but are taking a test, or even putting the tip on the dinner bill as our smart friends would look on. And it's quite socially acceptable to talk about choking or performing in math. You don't hear highly educated people walking around talking about the fact or bragging about the fact that they're not good readers. But you hear people all the time about how they're not math. And unfortunately, in the U.S., this tends to be more so among girls and women than boys and men. Mom and I have tried to understand where this fear of math comes from. And we've actually peered inside the brains using functional magnetic resonance imaging of people who are worried about math. We've shown that math phobia correlates with a concrete visceral sensation such as pain, of which we have every right to. In fact, when people who are worried about math are just getting ready to take a math test, they're not even taking it, they're just getting ready. Areas known to be involved in our neural pain response are active. When we say math is painful, there's some truth to it for some people. But where does this math anxiety come from? It turns out that math anxiety is contagious. When adults are worried about math, the children around them start worrying too. As young as first grade, when kids are in classrooms with teachers who are anxious about their own math ability, these kids learn less across the school year. And it turns out that this is more prevalent in girls than boys. At this young age, kids tend to mimic same-sex adults, and at least in the US, over 90% of our elementary school teachers are women. Of course, it's not just what happens in the classroom. Social media plays a big role here too. It wasn't so long ago that you could purchase a Teen Talk Barbie that when the cord was pulled, it would say things like, "Will we ever have enough clothes?" and "Math is tough." And just a few years ago, major retailers were marketing t-shirts at our young girls that read things like, "I'm too pretty to do," or "I'm too pretty to do my homework, so my brother does it for me." And let's not forget about the parents. Oh, the parents. It turns out that when parents are worried about their own math ability and they help their kids out with math, their kids learn less math across the school year.
你能帮我搬
One parent
我来吧，桌子
I
上。
judge my first graders' math homework by whether it's one glass assignment or a 3 glass.
因为他在地上接受害怕，可能
When adults are anxious about their own math ability, it rubs off on their kids and it affects whether they choke and thrive. But just as we can put limits on, we can take them off. My research team and I have shown that when we help parents do activities with their kids, rather than say just doing bedtime stories or bedtime reading, they do bedtime math, which are fun story problems to do with your kids at night. Not only do children's attitudes about math improve, but their math performance across the school year improves as well. From the classroom to parents to media, and it really makes a difference in terms of whether we choke or thrive. Fast forward from my high school soccer game to my freshman year in college. I was in the chemistry sequence for science majors, and boy, did I. Even though I studied for my first midterm exam, I thought I was ready to go. I bombed it. I literally got the worst grade in a class of 400 students. I was convinced I wasn't going to be a science major, that maybe I was dropping out of college altogether. But that changed how I studied. Instead of studying alone, I started studying with a group of friends who at the end of the study session would close their books and compete for the right answer. We learned to practice understanding. If you could have looked inside my brain during that first mid a lot like the math anxious individuals I studied. It was probably there during the stressful study situation as well. But when I was, my mind was quiet. I actually got one of the highest grades in the engineering class. It wasn't just about learning the material. It was about learning how to overcome my limits when it mattered most. What happens in our lives really matters. And knowing this, we can learn how to prepare ourselves and others for success, not just on the playing field, but in the boardroom and in the classroom as well.
This is for my mom, even though I told her to say, "Hey, Evie," she said, "Oh my God, it's not another conference, is it?" As a 21-year-old, I was drawn to the word brave, spots for ripping yarns and people who could tell them. So, brain, I went out adventure collecting. Without knowing how to spell starboard or which side it referred to, I got on a 46-foot boat and I sailed from Malta to Tunisia to Sicily. I traveled 11,000 miles over 13 months, 7 different countries, without a plan or a phone or a credit card. $50 in traveler's check, which if you're under 30, it's like a little booklet of perforated, I don't know, and some expired antibiotics my mom made me bring. And then running out of money, I landed as a nanny for 2 kids, 4 and 7, who had just lost their mom. I moved into their house so I could cover things on the 3 days a week their dad worked as a flight attendant for Qantas. I smeared sunblock on their noses and Vegemite on their toast. I read them to sleep at night. I cleaned the counters. The heavy lifting was left for the team. Organized with emotions and answered the hardest, such that his kids and hers could feel moderate safety. Questions like, what is cremation? And what happens to us if we die? And so it is I stood witness to the unphotographable, unmeasurable bravery in Sydney, Australia. And over the years since, I find I just can't stop cataloging these Olympic achievements in family life. The really big things often come with game plan and a team of experts and enough adrenaline to lift the school bus over your head. But inside every crisis you might be ready for are 130 surprises that are not. I had stage 3 cancer in my 30s, and I can tell you that following the chemo schedule didn't take nearly as much courage as admitting to my husband that sex felt less sexy after my boobs, which were once a real strong suit for me, were made weird and uneven by a surgeon's knife. Here's a surprise. My friend's father, in his final days, addled by dementia, chased around the second floor with a fork he hid in his pajamas. They tell you there will be loss. They tell you you will be with your dad even as he's coming to you. I've interviewed 28 people, and yes, I listen to their stories, and I'm really impressed. But I tell you the ones I know the best, the ones they can tell without choking up. The moment when Brian Stevens' grandmother, or Steve Kerr's father, or Samantha Power's stepfather, or Cecile Richards' mom was right there, and right where better understood if you look at the smaller moments, family life, or it might be your fault, or it might remind you of something, or because people are so suggestible, or expression or phrasing might somehow make things worse. Say your kid was dropped for the test, and they were in it, it mattered, they won, or your husband was a big deal at work, or your mom won't wear the diapers. It would really help her get through Mahjong on Wednesday. How should we calibrate the exquisite bravery to respond productively when someone in our family looks at us and says, do I know you? I weigh myself before and after every meal. I hear voices. I feel. He raped me. I raped her. I cut myself. I bought a gun. I stopped taking the medication. I stopped making online bets. Sometimes I wonder, is more life really worth all the suffering? Bravery is the great guts to move to the wound as composed as a war nurse, holding eye contact and saying these 7 words. Tell me more. What else? Go on. That's how the brave shine. That's all they do. They say, tell me more. What else? Go on. Even if they're scared, what might happen? Even if they have no training in this moment, even if it's late and they have an early flight. Here's 2 things the brave don't do. They don't take over and become the hero. Like it's a battle and the moves are so obvious. You just pick up a weapon with your ripped pecs and ropey veins. In families, bravery is mostly just sitting there. How to communicate, I can hear anything you want to tell me. And a nice warm face that says, this is so hard, so you will figure it out. Personally, I thought love meant action. I had no idea it could be so still. When things get hairy for one of my people, everything he does is to grab a clipboard, make a to-do list, and start calendaring appointments. Because where there's love, there's attachment. And I don't care what the people say. What's happening to them is also happening at least at some level to us. And all that can accidentally put us center stage. No longer coach or the minister, but rather want to be a friend. With these gritty endurance types, I've been admiring no self and no need, or at least they know how to override all that with a character who is not us. The second thing the brain does leave. Just hide work or hobby or some other socially acceptable business. Worse moment. Sitting on my hands just under going to get an MFA here. Because I can't help it. Why do I have to start again? Hardly anyone been in a long year. I've at least wondered how it is that their desire becomes so burpy Sometimes I see myself naked, in pregnancies, scars from cancer, other things that I don't feel you need to be visualizing right about now. And I think it's a miracle that man stays with me. But, he's not untouched by time either. And that's just the physical. I mean, who here hasn't wanted to be with someone who has been on the toilet or bitching at the Comcast? Leaving behind our own humiliating history, maybe with the nice person we met at art school in Paris. It's an option. People take it. The brave hang around. They're available, ready to bear witness. The fact of bravery was made clear for me during a conversation with my friend Liz while she was dying from 46. She said she had this weird, long, totally convincing dream where all the moms and dads, and they were on full looking down to a thick glass floor. And in this imaginary space her subconscious created, there was one rule. You could watch your child's life unfold, but you could only intervene once. In Liz's dream, a perfect dream, she never had to intervene. She had given them enough while she was here. The final act, then, of the truly brave is leaning back and letting him go. Reward for all this bravery? Not gold medals, not hero shots for Strava, not ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, or owning the dinner party with Burning Man stories. I think you know who you are. Maybe not even thanks. The reward is a full human experience, complete with all the emotions at maximum dosage, where we have been put to great use and found an love that is complete in its expression and its transmission. The reward is humble, empty, and in awe. Magnificent, the hell, from cradle to grave, the most hypothesis with inner. So here's to anyone who notices who reads between the lines, who asks the right questions but not too many, who takes notes at the doctor's office and wipes blood young, and listens, holds, and stays. We, who, untrained and always a little off guard, still dare to love, to be loved. That's great.
The most important things I know, I learned in a kayak on my honeymoon. Picture this. I arrive in Hawaii, and I look adoringly at my brand new husband as we get in a two-person kayak together. Then things go wrong. You see, in a two-person kayak, the passenger in the back, usually the larger passenger, is supposed to drive using their paddles. Well, I didn't like how he was driving. So I decided to drive. And exactly at the moment I thought I had taken over, we flipped over 3 separate times. Apparently, we set a record. So I get back in the kayak, now dripping wet, when our guide up ahead turns back and says, "Okay, folks, let's negotiate these things to the left because you're going to hit that beach up ahead." Negotiating kayak. In that moment, I realized that although I had been teaching negotiation for a few years already, I had missed something important. And I was not alone. A lot of us have misconceptions about negotiation. We're taught that it's a battle over money, that it involves losing. So we avoid it altogether. In fact, 54% of us didn't negotiate our last salary. That's from research, by the way. I'm not actually seeing into your souls. It is that before that guy, I had never heard anyone use the word negotiate way before. I too had absorbed this message that it was a contest of wills. You know, like 5 minutes earlier when I told us in the room. But there's another way to think about it, isn't there? What am I doing? I want to share 5 lessons about negotiation that just change your life. And the first is this: negotiation is simply steering. It is any conversation in which you have a relationship. And it's so much more than the money conversations. You know, just like a kayak where we want to steer consistently to our goal, we can be steering our relationships almost every minute of the day. You know, when I got back from that honeymoon, I looked around and I saw opportunities to negotiate everywhere. Be getting to know my bosses better so that I understood what they prioritized most. I could be calling my clients regularly and asking them what was new in their businesses. And I realized something powerful. If we intentionally focus on the everyday steering, what happens when we do get to the money conversation? We're more likely to be successful. Which brings me to lesson 2. Because people make more money. There's one negotiation technique that most of us are using. So years ago, a professor set people up to negotiate as part of a study. Only 7% of those people achieved the optimal outcome. Well, they didn't lead with their points. They asked questions first. Bottom line, in negotiation, you get more by asking questions than by arguing. But not just any questions. That 7%, they open questions. Questions that uncover the other person's needs, concerns, and goals. And most of us aren't great at that. When I teach people about asking questions, I say, okay, I've just taken a trip. What to get some good information? Top 2 questions they ask, I bet you could guess. Number 1, where did you go? Reno. Did you have a good time? Yeah. 2 closed questions, 2 one-word answers. So, what's the best question? Well, it's a little bit of a trick. Technically, the best question of all doesn't end with a question mark. It's, tell me all about your vacation. Is the biggest question you can ask. Powerful first question in any negotiation, at work or at home. With the hiring manager, tell the company sees the salary range for this position. With your teenager, tell me what's made you ask for a $50 a week allowance. Tell me gets you the most information, but it also builds trust, so it creates the best deals. Lesson 3, the negotiation starts before the negotiation starts. Most people don't know that every negotiation actually comes in 2 parts. The second part, we all know that. You're sitting down with someone else. But that first part, that's what I call the mirror. Because we have to negotiate with ourselves before we negotiate with anyone else. And it's the most critical part of the negotiation too. Because if we don't get this right, the negotiation stops there. We don't ask. We get confused about our priorities. We shut ourselves down before we give anybody else the chance. If you want to master the mirror, try asking yourself, how have I handled something like this successfully before? Did you know that research shows about a time and write it that we achieve great results before we go into negotiating? We are more likely to negotiate well. Why? Ourselves of who we are at our most powerful, and we also gather data on strategies that are likely to work for us. I once counseled someone named May who was struggling to ask for a raise. You know, in May's family, they were taught that you should wait until something was offered to you. So I asked May about the last time she successfully advocated for herself. And she told me she actually felt really confident negotiating for the job in the first place. She really believed in his mission, and she felt confident she could contribute. You know, as May wrote this down, I saw her face change and her confidence grow. May went in, and she got that raise. Lesson 4. Land the plane. Brilliance named Brody, who sometimes would lose deals because he talked too much. He'd ask a great question, and then he would get scared of the silence, so he would eat it up with his words. What do you need to get this done here today? Well, I know our price point might be a little bit higher than that of our competitors, but I think if you go ahead and look at our customer reviews. Want to know the secret to great deals? Recent research found that the period of silence in negotiation not only more likely that the other person would give you a high value move, but it also came across as collaborative. So, how much silence? I just did it. 3.5. You were nervous, but we all survived. Call landing the plane. Ask your question, make your proposal, zip it. And finally, lesson. Make your adversary your partner. 3 a.m. And you have 5 hours to go. The entire world is expecting you and several other countries to announce a peace deal. But right now, you have a problem because one of the diplomats has left the building and is down in the parking lot threatening to drive away because he feels disrespected. This was the situation that one of the diplomats I work with faced. Most of us face things like this in our everyday negotiations. So much of the popular wisdom talks about our adversary, our opponent. Well, in most everyday that at the bargaining table becomes our partner once that deal is done. The boss is, once you get it, you're working together. Or that little contractor you're negotiating with over your kitchen. Once you settle on a price, you're trusting her to build a room you're going to. And even when you feel like an opponent, you're still sleeping in the same bed at the end of the day. That I worked with, he walked out of the building, down to the parking lot, and he approached the man who. He said to him, "We are on the same side." Eventually, the two men walked together back into that building. Later, that peace deal. My negotiating motto is this: I never request, I recruit. I don't the table. I want to pull the questions to my side of the table so that we are now co-conspirators working toward the same goal. Negotiation is not a battle. It is simply steering. And if we lead with curiosity about ourselves and about others, we won't just create great deals, we'll create great relationships along the way. Speaking of which, you might what happened after the honeymoon? My husband and I have been happily steering together for 18 years. Just not in a kayak. Thank you.
started with this. I'm a mom, and I have 13-year-old twins. I want to share a vivid memory from when they were in pre-K. A mom came over at pickup to the friend, and she started telling me about her daughter. She said, she's like me. She's just not a math kid. But your boys are math kids. We're just not math people. I worried if I opened my mouth to disagree, I'd say something crazy. And we all know the price of crazy that picks. We never get invited to eat later. So I did my job. She was never be good at math. Reading, if the kid struggled, we said, oh, she's just not a reading kid. And then we took away all the challenge books and writing assignments for the rest of her school years. We'd never do that. We'd never be okay labeling some of the kids reading kids and leaving the rest illiterate. I'm a math learning expert and an education technologist. And believe it or not, I was not always a math kid. But for the last 12 years, I have observed millions of students complete billions. Build the math learning nonprofit. And in all that work, I've learned one important thing. We're asking the wrong question in math learning. Instead of asking who can learn math, we should be asking, how do you teach math? Because when we ask who, we imply that math learning is some rare genetic ability. But it's not. Piles of data that tell us we can all build a math, and we all need a math mind. And so I have 4 steps to offer that begin to answer the question, how do we build a math mind? And hopefully put an end to labeling once and for all. Step 1, believe. Remember when I said I wasn't always a math kid? I was in 6th grade. I had just transferred schools. And it was in math class that I found it. I had no friends in math. And the kids who were thriving were a group of boys who wouldn't talk to them either. Because one day after it's my teacher called me over to his desk and he said, if you try your very best, you could be just as good as the boys. Not an ideal thing to say to a little girl. And the gender gaps in math persist today. It didn't matter because my heart exploded. The coolest teacher I had ever met said that I could succeed. Hyperbole maybe, but I think his words changed the course of my life. Because he believed in a powerful chain reaction. Because he believed, I built up the extra help. And with that extra help, I did the extra work. And with that courage, extra help, extra work, I became a math kid. And along the way, I learned my experience was pretty normal. All kids, even the math kids, fall behind, struggle, or feel math anxiety. Kids is someone believes, and so they do the work and they catch up. Actually, in any subject you learn, you can fall behind, but that's usually a signal to work harder. But in math, that same signal is that you don't have what it takes and you give up and feel your fate. And so that's why the first step is to believe. And the second step is to understand. Don't just memorize math, understand it and use pictures. Let's say you have to take a reading test and you memorize words to take the test. You don't actually know how to read, but let's say you get an A. And then naturally, a few weeks later, you'd forget a lot of what you've memorized, but with it, you would forget how to read. Terrifying, right? And that's what math class feels like. Think about how you can grab any book off, feel calm and confident because you can read it.
What if your math learning where everything clicked into place and your math learning was durable? Let's take a big idea of math. Ratios and proportional ratios. 1 is to 3 is to 1. More scary math to memorize? No way. I can use a picture from my everyday life to understand ratios. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. My twins have very different preferences. One likes a sandwich with 1 scoop of jelly and 2 peanut butter. Makes the sandwich with 3 scoops of jelly and very sandwiches. That should make sense. Let's take a look at this problem. Which fraction has a value closest to 1/2? 2/2, 5/8, 1/6, or 1/5? Now, a lot of us have been trained to just jump right in and start calculating. We're looking for a common denominator across fractions. Because that's kind of 8, 6, and 2 in your head, you might be. But there is another way to get started, which is hard and understand. You might imagine or draw a rectangle and shade in one. And imagine what is 1/2? What is 2? Well, that's the exact same rectangle. Now shaded in 2 halves is 1/4. As pretty students can imagine or draw a rectangle, it would become obvious that 5 is the only reasonable option. Because sometimes the reward is not how calculate right. Now, this question is American fourth graders on a national test. And 3% got this question wrong. The most commonly picked answer, 2 halves. The most wrong answer. Because that's what happens when we bend it. So just like we have to make math meaningful, we have to make math fun. Now, I know what you're thinking. A worksheet with 50 tedious long pictures. But we've known for years, in reading, if we want kids to learn it and to love it, we need to appeal to novels with elves, graphic novels with spies. What's that in games, card games, board games, real world games you just make up on the fly. And just like we're told to read to our kids for 20 minutes a day, play games often. When my twins were little, a favorite was the game Battleship, where the objective is to sink the opponent's ship, but also an engaging application of playing. If you get a hit on each block, you're quickly thinking of which coordinate to call X. You can also just play simple games that you make up in real world.
刚抽的，刚才。哎，
弄了，给你2万弄好了。
妈，也那啥。这不行，花点钱。
你把那个梯子打开那个。
啊，你打开那个是吗？哈。
你把那个。
这个呢？这个是吧？打开这个拿。
就是这个啊。就是这个。
啊，我剪了，还没有反应。好嘞。
Have you ever noticed how the math kids giggle about math?
说激动没反应。
They love the power and the beauty of math. And it's because they're made of different genetic stuff.
没反应。
好了。
And they learned math.
那个钉钉复制那个。复制。
for ourselves or we all know that it's pretty hard if we hate and exclusive. But it can change when we make decisions, when we see the power and the beauty of that. No one can take that from us. Kierkegaard once talked about two kinds of love: spontaneous love and true love. Spontaneous love just happens to you. You don't have any control over it. But true love is something different. It's where you decide. And so the change in you is to approach it with the plan, with the knowledge, and with the patience that you will get to true love. Because in math, true love is waiting for you. Thank you.
I once had a law professor that often makes it joke that the entire reason why you go to law school is because you have a handful of two-line phrases. It's not the words I know, but today I want to try really hard to impress talking about zeal. Zeal is hands down one of my favorite words, one of the most important words. Zeal, great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or an objective. It's not the only more calm to talk about having passion, enthusiasm. There are other fun ways to talk about having enthusiasm. But I'm talking very particularly about zeal. And zeal is the very particular word that I'm choosing today, and it's so important to me because I'm a lawyer. So going back to that dinner party, whether you're making small talk with a stranger at the bar, whether you're at a dinner party, it's pretty common to ask a professional. When people find out, it's pretty common that people want to ask me about something they've had before, something they think's around the corner. Better yet, halfway across the country in this the lawyers that face this type of situation. It might be that they ask a very specific type of work you do, and maybe you can help them in the right direction. But if you think about it, odds are, whenever a lawyer gets asked in this type of situation, the most likely correct answer, I don't know. People hate to say I don't know. Brunellians hate to say I don't know. But if you think about it, that's probably true. Okay, so we have 50 states. Every state has a bunch of different cities and localities with their own laws. 50 different states with laws. A federal system on top of them with laws. And these laws are changing all the time. If you become a lawyer, you probably become specialized. You don't really go to law school to learn everything in every situation that person at the bar. So what you do instead is you learn in law school as a lawyer. That way you can kind of be a professional candidate. Whatever situation you end up in, wherever you practice, whatever you decide to do, however things evolve, you can do what you need to do to get up to date, to be adaptable, to be a professional. Now, whether you're a current senior considering law school, or whether law school is never in your cards and you just want to, brush up on your logic skills for some reason, or I once had an ex-girlfriend tell me that it wasn't fair dating a lawyer because I won every argument. So, for whatever reason, if you want to learn what it means to think like a lawyer, you don't have to go to law school. There's plenty of books and websites and videos out there on this topic. And if you dive into it, probably the most common things you're going to see are. So, like, the first thing, especially specifically for things for law students, will be taught IRAC. Issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. So in law school, most exams are what we call issue spot, like a big long fact pattern where you're supposed to read it. And the idea is that you do this. You spot the issue. You discuss what the rule is, you show your work, your analysis, application, and you explain the conclusion that you come from. And while you're doing this, you're also taught these other things. You're taught to avoid emotional reactions and distractions. Don't let a red herring take you off topic, but focus on a lot of the core of the issue. Maybe you're assigned this ideal personal degree, or maybe you will see the other side to anticipate it, get out in front of it, and respond to it. You learn how to observe what's patterns, what's happening, what happened. You kind of work for it. You might want to say, hey, this is just like this thing that happened. Or the same thing that happened today. Or it's not like that thing, it's something new. And at the same time, you have to these are all fun. What it means to me to think like a lawyer, and how I hope my clients do. These aren't the first things that come to mind. If you think about it, if you're asking, hey, what do you think about that lawyer that handled your divorce? They're never going to say, oh, that's so great at IRAP. I really love that. No. Instead, I'm going back to my words about zeal. Because to me, what I hope to be is a zealous advocate. The idea of lawyers as a zealous advocate has been around for a while. One of the first ways it was written out was in the American Bar Association's Canon of 1908. So this is basically this organization, a draft of ethics rules that they suggested that other states and other courts kind of adapt and make their own kind of sample. And under Canon 15, they wrote, under Canon 15, which is how far a lawyer may go in supporting a client's cause, they wrote that the lawyer owes entire devotion to the interest of the client. Warm zeal, not just zeal, warm zeal, in defense of his rights and exert him at the utmost learning and ability, to the end that nothing be taken or held from him, save by the rules of law legally applied. All right, so let's break this down. So the first part of it, the lawyer owes entire devotion. Basically, that meaning is a lawyer, should be unbiased, not playing the other side. Next, warm zeal. Try as hard as whatever you can for your client. Obviously, there are limits to this. You can't go out and better solve the situation. You have to stay within the ethics field. But even if something may be unpopular or unconventional, whatever is best in the context for your client, you should do the utmost of your ability. And in the end, that I want to talk a little bit about how I learned what it means to be or that they've done people don't end up in this type of situation or in family or in general for really rosy reasons. Unfortunately, the majority of my clients are dealing with things like substance abuse, poverty, domestic violence, and too often a combination of the two. But I was doing the type of work I wanted to do, and I learned what it means to be a zealous advocate, regardless of the situation. You can use the play the cards you know. Sometimes those help not so great cards. But regardless, my responsibilities and my duties are the same. To be a zealous advocate. And while I was going through this process of learning what it meant to be a zealous advocate for them, I also witnessed that these parents, more often than not, regardless of how good or bad the situation was that brought them to work with me, were often a zealous advocate for their own children. They had strong, passionate feelings about how their children should be treated. And it was